The word cult has a bad connotation that is attached to it, and it is easy to see why. Cults are often extremely exclusive, claiming what they know is the ultimate truth, and everything else is wrong. They're also very secretive, often keeping their teachings exclusively as part of the cult, generally not available to outsiders. Even then, some of the teachings may be presented to only the high-ranking officials of the cult. It is this kind of secrecy that also bestows skepticism amongst the outside world. Furthermore, cults are very authoritarian. Should you join one, the leader will expect complete loyalty with complete obedience. In some situations, should you disagree with the leader, or the cult in general, it could lead to some unsavory consequences. Although it may be true that radical cults are becoming less of an issue today, most of them just being different belief systems that are opposite of major religions, some still exist, and others may be just as scary as some of the scariest cults to have existed prior in human history. That being a perfect place to transition, let's discuss some scary cults. Order of the Solar Temple. This particular cult was formed in 1984 by Joseph Di Mambro and Luc Jouret and had many followers around the globe. Many of the other followers being from Switzerland, France, and Canada. The group drew inspiration from a lot of different sources, mainly from spiritual/religious movements from the past, and drew a great deal of inspiration from the Rosicrucians and the Knights Templar. The group originally began with its core belief, that being paving the way for a new age of spiritualism, but then moved to become more doomsday focused in nature. In addition, it also became extremely paranoid to the outside world. Jouret was the organization's face. Despite the fact he would often give speeches of the impending doom, many people reported his personality as being quite welcoming, hence why he was the recruitment leader. Di Mambro took control over the cult's finances. Also, shockingly enough, the cult's finances increased drastically as the members came flying in. This is because most of the people in the cult were from an upper or middle class. The cult eventually saw a huge decline in fortune, when there were many defections, gun charges, and reportedly, allegations of sexual misconduct. Realizing that the group was losing traction, the leaders then assumed it was time for everyone to ascend to a higher plane of existence to avoid the impending doom mentioned earlier. Sadly, the cult would go about it in a terrible way: death by fire. By 1994, the organization would find 2 of its churches in flames. When investigators officially arrived on the scene, they were baffled, to say the least. While investigating, they found 48 people dead. Some committed suicide, while others were killed. Those who were killed were either shot, injected with tranquilizers, or suffocated, as evident by the empty gun shells lying around, the used syringes, and the plastic bags over some of the bodies. By 1995, 16 more bodies would turn up dead, this time in another building, owned by the organization in the Swiss Alps. 2 years later, in 1997, 5 more members would be found dead in another building owned by the organization in Quebec. Preceding these 2 events would mark the end of the Solar Temple, as the cult's leaders would soon commit suicide. Heaven's Gate. Perhaps one of the more well-known cults on this list, Heaven's Gate was founded in 1974. This cult took residence in the Rancho Santa Fe, California mansion. This cult was a religious sect, led by Marshall Harif Applewhite and Bonnie Nettles. This one, like most other cults, combined Christian beliefs with an apparent belief that salvation would be brought upon by a UFO that would take them to heaven when the comet Hale-Bopp passed. Anyway, the cult initially formed when leader Applewhite had a heart attack and a near-death experience. He said he had gotten a vision of events to come, and assumed that his nurse, Nettles, were the next messiahs that could bring salvation to the people of Earth, and thus the cult was born. On a stranger note, Applewhite describes one of his core beliefs of human existence and body as the temporary containers of the soul. The final act of metamorphosis, or separation from the human kingdom, is the disconnect, or separation from the human physical container, or body, in order to be released from this human environment. Sadly, in 1997, when the Hale-Bopp comet passed, the cult committed a mass suicide. 39 people, 21 women and 18 men, all died. After being drugged, other organization members would wrap plastic bags over their heads and wait their turn. Illume Shinrikyo. Illume Shinrikyo was founded in 1984 and it followed a discriminative/exclusive interpretation of Buddhism, Tibetan Buddhism, Hinduism, with ideas from the Christian Book of Revelation. On paper, this seems like a relatively good idea, as Buddhism and Hinduism are generally quite peaceful. However, the cult followed the interpretation of leader Shoko Asahara, who also interpreted most of the scripture to mean violence, and combined all the previous belief systems mentioned earlier with apocalyptic beliefs. In fact, the cult was actually extremely obsessed with the apocalypse. The cult was also behind a series of terrible events in Japan. It carried out a horrifying sarin nerve gas attack on the Tokyo subway system in 1995, which caused thousands of people to get injured and ultimately killed 12. Since then, the cult had been deemed a terrorist organization by the US State Department of Military. In 2007, the group would split into two factions because of internal disputes after years of losing their leader, Shoko Asahara, who after a long 8-year trial was sentenced to death by hanging in 1995. Both factions of the cult apparently still exist, but have been inactive up to this point. However, the US military still keeps an eye on the living members. Most of them live in Japan, but 39 allegedly made their way to Russia. The Fundamentalist Latter-day Saints. This specific cult was formed in 1991, and is a radical, polygamist sect that has its origins in Mormon roots. The cult specifically split apart from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, more than a century ago, after the issue of polygamy had been renounced by the church. They have followers in Colorado City, Arizona, and Hindale, Utah, with members in the thousands. Numbers range from 6,000 to 10,000 to be exact. When the cult originally formed, there were struggles for power, many claiming to be prophets, while others claimed they had the natural ability to lead. This kind of infighting would continue until Rulin Jeffs, now essentially the face of the cult, took control in 2002. However, he died shortly after, and his son, Warren Jeffs, soon took the torch and became the group's leader. Warren was sent to prison in 2007 after child marriage, bigamy, child abuse, incest, abandonment of teenage boys, and racism became public knowledge. Allegedly, the cult even allows some shady characters to join their ranks, like other cult members, specifically that of the Ku Klux Klan. Speaking of which, the Ku Klux Klan. The Ku Klux Klan was founded in 1866 and extended into almost every southern state by 1870. It has its origins in the Confederacy during the times of the Civil War, and by the early 20th century became an outlet/vehicle for white resistance of the Republican Party's Reconstruction-era policies aimed at establishing political and economic equality for blacks, according to History.com. Its ranks only allowed white people, mainly those of the male sex, and the organization was essentially just a hate group. They built an underground campaign filled with violence, rape, and racial slurs against black people, as well as white Republican leaders. By the 1960s, the cult extended its hatred towards black sympathizers, a term they coined, immigrants, Catholics, Jews, and organized labor. Their hatred only escalated when civil rights movements began getting traction in the 1960s. This included bombings of black schools and churches, as well as anyone who called themselves an activist in the southern states. Even scarier yet, the cult hasn't diminished, not even after laws protecting black citizens arose. In fact, many argue that the cult has just gotten worse because many people are allegedly KKK members in secret. Just as a side note, this is not a conspiracy theory or anything of the sort. The Ku Klux Klan is apparently still active in some parts of the South, although they are not as dangerous due to the several laws in place to protect everyone. They are still racist, who will seek to harm any minorities or black sympathizers given the chance. Well, that was disturbing. It is at this point that I would like to point out that not all cults are bad. Some are just small religions, really. But the word cult carries such a bad connotation to it that many people don't see that. In the end, all I have to say is, if you are thinking of joining a cult, please do your research. Or, just don't join a cult in general. Well, with that, let me leave you with this little factoid. Did you know 5 cults active today are the Unification Church, the Church of Scientology, the Church Universal and Triumphant, Raelism, and the Ku Klux Klan, like mentioned earlier.